God help me, I should have turned around the moment I heard the name whispered in hushed, fearful tones by the locals in downtown Vicksburg. Devil's Pit, they called it, their eyes darting away as if speaking the words might summon something unholy. But I was a fool, a historian drunk on the promise of uncovering forgotten Civil War secrets, convinced that academic curiosity could shield me from whatever darkness lurked in those Mississippi woods. The year was 2023, and I had come to Vicksburg to research a dissertation on lesser-known Civil War sites. The siege of Vicksburg in 1863 had left scars on this land that time seemed unable to heal, and locals spoke of places where the earth itself remembered the horror. The Devil's Pit was one such place, a massive crater blown into existence during the siege, where Union forces had tunneled beneath Confederate lines and detonated thousands of pounds of black powder. What followed that explosion wasn't just the collapse of Confederate defenses. According to the records I'd found in dusty archives, it was something far worse. Soldiers on both sides reported hearing screams that seemed to come from the earth itself, voices that spoke in tongues no human throat could form. The crater that remained was said to be cursed, a wound in the world that refused to heal. I thought it was folklore. I was wrong. The first sign that something was amiss came as I drove down the narrow dirt road leading to the site. My GPS had died 20 minutes earlier, its screen flickering with impossible readings that showed me driving through solid earth or, worse, empty space. The radio crackled with static that almost sounded like whispers, and twice I could have sworn I heard cannon fire echoing in the distance. The trees pressed close to the road, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even the afternoon sun barely penetrated. Spanish moss hung like burial shrouds, swaying without wind. As I drove deeper into the woods, the temperature in my car began to drop, despite the Mississippi heat outside. My breath started to fog, and ice crystals formed on the inside of my windows. That's when I saw the first figure. It stood just off the road, partially hidden behind a massive oak tree. At first glance, it looked like a Civil War reenactor, blue Union uniform, musket at the ready. But something was wrong with the way it stood, too still, too straight. As my car approached, the figure turned its head to follow my movement, and I caught a glimpse of its face in my headlights. There was no face. Just shadow beneath the brim of its capey cap, shadow that seemed to writhe and move with malevolent purpose. I pressed harder on the accelerator, my heart hammering against my ribs. In my rearview mirror, I watched the figure step onto the road behind me, raising its musket. I heard no shot, but my rear window exploded inward, showering me with glass. When I looked back again, the road was empty. The Devil's Pit announced itself long before I saw it. The very air grew thick and oppressive, heavy with the smell of sulfur and something else, something organic and rotting. The trees around me began to change, their bark blackened as if by fire, their leaves withered despite the season. Spanish moss hung in tatters, looking more like torn flesh than vegetation. And then I heard the screaming. It started as a low moan that seemed to rise from the earth itself, a sound of such profound anguish that it made my teeth ache. As I got closer to the pit, the moaning grew louder, multiplying, until it became a chorus of the damned. Mixed with the human voices were sounds that no throat should make, wet, gurgling cries that spoke of things better left buried. I parked my car at the edge of a clearing and stepped out on shaking legs. The moment my feet touched the ground, the screaming stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, pregnant with malevolent anticipation. The Devil's Pit lay before me like a wound in the world. It was larger than I had expected, easily 100 feet across and impossibly deep. The sides were perfectly smooth, as if carved by some giant hand, and they descended into blackness so complete that my flashlight beam seemed to be swallowed before it could penetrate more than a few feet. The air rising from the pit was cold, not the natural coolness of earth, but the bone-deep cold of the grave. As I approached the edge, my flashlight began to flicker. The beam grew dimmer with each step, and by the time I reached the rim, it provided barely more illumination than a dying candle. I pulled out my phone to use its light, but the screen showed only static, pixels dancing in patterns that hurt to look at. That's when I heard the whispers. They rose from the pit like smoke, voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize but somehow understood. They spoke of pain, of endless torment, of souls trapped between worlds. They spoke my name. Michael, they whispered, the sound like dead leaves rustling. Michael Thompson. We've been waiting for you. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. How could they know my name? I had told no one of my plans to visit this place, had kept my research secret even from my dissertation advisor. Don't be afraid, Michael, the voices continued, multiplying now, a dozen tongues speaking in perfect unison. We've been so lonely down here. So cold. We just want company. We just want someone to share our pain. The ground beneath my feet began to vibrate, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep within the earth. Cracks appeared in the soil around the pit's edge, spider webbing outward in all directions. As I watched in horror, something began to emerge from those cracks, fingers, pale and skeletal, clawing at the earth as if trying to pull themselves free. I ran. Behind me, the whispers turned to shrieks of rage. The ground shook more violently, and I could hear the sound of earth falling into the pit as its edges crumbled. Trees groaned and toppled, their massive trunks crashing to the ground mere feet from where I fled. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. As I finally got the door open, I heard footsteps, dozens of them, marching in perfect unison. I didn't dare look back. The engine turned over on the third try, and I peeled out of the clearing, gravel and dirt flying from beneath my tires. In my rearview mirror, I saw them, an entire regiment of ghostly soldiers emerging from the tree line, their uniforms from both sides of the Civil War. They moved with jerky, unnatural motions, like marionettes controlled by a mad puppeteer. The drive back to town was a nightmare of wrong turns and dead ends. Roads that had been there on my way in had simply vanished, replaced by impenetrable walls of thorns and twisted trees. My GPS remained dead, its screen showing nothing but that crawling static. The radio crackled with voices speaking in that same unknown language, occasionally breaking into fragments of English that chilled my blood. "Can't leave," one voice whispered through the static. "None of them can leave. They're all still here, Michael. All still fighting their war." I took a turn I didn't remember and found myself on a different road entirely, one that seemed to lead deeper into the woods rather than out. The trees here were different, older, more twisted, their branches reaching across the road like gnarled fingers trying to snare passing travelers. That's when I saw the house. It stood in a clearing just off the road, an antebellum mansion that should have been beautiful but instead radiated wrongness. Its white columns were stained with something dark that could have been rust or blood, and its windows were boarded up with planks that looked like they'd been torn from coffins. Spanish moss hung from its eaves like funeral veils. But it was the people on the porch that made me slam on the brakes. They sat in rocking chairs that moved back and forth in perfect rhythm, despite the absence of any wind. Men and women in period dress, some in Union blue, others in Confederate gray. Their faces were pale as bone, their eyes black holes in their skulls. As my headlights swept across them, they all turned to look at me with those empty eye sockets, their heads moving in unnatural unison. One of them, a woman in a tattered ball gown, stood and walked to the edge of the porch. When she opened her mouth to speak, no sound came out, but I could read her lips clearly. "Join us." I floored the accelerator, my car lurching forward with a squeal of tires. In my rearview mirror, I watched the figures on the porch rise as one, their movements unnaturally fluid. They began to walk down the steps, their feet not quite touching the ground. The road ahead curved sharply, and I took the turn too fast. My car skidded sideways, tires losing their grip on the loose dirt. For a terrifying moment, I thought I was going to flip, but somehow I managed to regain control. When I looked back, the house was gone. There was nothing behind me but empty road stretching into darkness. But I wasn't alone. Someone, or something, was sitting in my passenger seat. I jerked the wheel hard to the right, nearly sending us into the trees. In the dim light from my dashboard, I could make out the silhouette of a man in a military uniform. He sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead through the windshield. No breath fogged the air around him. No heartbeat disturbed the silence. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice like the whisper of wind through a graveyard. "This place. It remembers. It holds on to things. Onto people." I tried to speak, but only a strangled croak emerged from my throat. "I was like you once," the figure continued. "Curious. Foolish. I came here in 1963, exactly 100 years after the explosion. I was researching for my master's thesis. Sound familiar?" My hands were locked on the steering wheel, knuckles white with strain. I wanted to look at him, to see his face, but I was terrified of what I might find. The pit doesn't just remember the dead, Michael. It collects them. Every soul that dies here, every life that ends in terror or pain, becomes part of it. Part of the hunger. What? What do you want? I managed to whisper. I want you to understand, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, cold and terrible. I want you to know what's coming. Because you can't leave, Michael. Nobody leaves the devil's pit. Not really. I looked at him then, unable to stop myself. Where his face should have been was a mass of torn flesh and exposed bone, one eye hanging from its socket by strands of tissue. His skull was caved in on one side, and I could see the gray matter beneath, pulsing with its own rhythm. I screamed and jerked the wheel again, this time sending the car off the road entirely. We crashed through underbrush and small trees, the windshield spiderwebbing from the impact of branches. The car rolled once, twice, before coming to rest against a massive oak. When I came to, I was alone. Blood ran down my forehead from where I'd hit the steering wheel, and my left arm hung at an unnatural angle. The car was totaled, steam rising from its crumpled hood. My phone was nowhere to be found, probably thrown clear during the crash. I climbed out through the shattered driver's side window, every movement sending spikes of agony through my injured arm. The forest around me was silent, not the peaceful quiet of nature, but the oppressive silence of a tomb. No insects buzzed, no night birds called. Even the wind had died. That's when I realized where the crash had brought me. I was back at the Devil's Pit. The massive crater yawned before me, its edges crumbling steadily into the abyss below. But something had changed. The pit was larger now, its circumference expanded by at least 50 feet in all directions. And it was glowing, not with light, but with its opposite, a darkness so profound it seemed to pull the surrounding shadows into itself. Welcome back, Michael. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, spoken by 100 throats in perfect harmony. I turned in a slow circle, trying to locate the source, but saw only empty forest. You've led us quite a chase, the voices continued. But you're here now. Where you belong. Where you've always belonged. The ground beneath my feet began to crack, fissures spreading outward from the pit's edge like a spider's web. I could hear things moving beneath the earth, scraping, clawing, digging their way to the surface. The pit hungers, Michael. It's been hungry for so long. All those soldiers who died here, all that pain and rage and terror, it feeds on it. But it's never enough. It needs more. It needs the living. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. It was as if invisible chains held me in place, anchored to this cursed ground. The cracks in the earth widened, and I could see things moving in the darkness below, pale shapes that might once have been human. Don't fight it, the voices whispered. It only makes the transition more painful. Embrace the hunger. Become part of something greater. The first hand broke through the soil near my feet, skeletal fingers wrapped in tattered blue cloth. Then another, this one in Confederate gray. More and more, until the ground around me was a forest of grasping, clawing hands. They grabbed at my ankles, my legs, pulling me slowly but inexorably toward the pit. I fell to my knees, then to my stomach, fingernails tearing as I tried to find purchase in the crumbling earth. Behind me, I could hear the voices of the dead rising in a hideous chorus, welcoming me to their ranks. But somehow, God knows how, I found the strength to fight. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was sheer stubborn refusal to accept the impossible. I managed to pull free from the grasping hands and stumbled to my feet. That's when I saw my salvation, a tree branch, thick and sturdy, hanging low enough for me to reach. I grabbed it with my good arm and hauled myself up, just as the ground where I'd been standing collapsed entirely, taking a dozen clawing hands with it. From my perch in the tree, I could see the true scope of the horror below. The Devil's Pit wasn't just a crater, it was a mouth, a massive maw lined with what looked like teeth but were actually the bones of the dead, thousands upon thousands of them, arranged in concentric circles that descended into unimaginable depths. And they were moving? Slowly, rhythmically, like a vast throat swallowing. You can't escape us forever, Michael, the voices called from below. We are patient. We are eternal. And you. You are already one of us. I looked down at my hands and nearly fell from the branch in shock. My skin was pale, almost translucent, and I could see dark veins beneath the surface. My injured arm hung at that impossible angle, but there was no pain anymore. No sensation at all. "No," I whispered. "No, I'm alive. I'm still alive." But was I? The crash should have killed me, I was sure of it now. The way the car had rolled, the force of the impact. No one could have survived that. Which meant I was already dead. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was dead, had been dead since the crash, maybe even before. The pit had claimed me the moment I set foot on this cursed ground, and everything since then, the chase through the forest, the ghostly passenger, even this desperate flight, had been nothing but the death throes of my consciousness, unwilling to accept its fate. "Now you understand," the voices said, and I could hear satisfaction in their tone. "Now you can let go. Join us, Michael. Join your brothers in eternal service to the hunger." Below me, the pit pulsed like a heart, its bone-lined walls contracting and expanding in a rhythm that matched my own fading pulse. The dead were gathering at its edges now, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, soldiers and civilians alike, all those who had died in terror and pain on this blood-soaked ground. They looked up at me with empty eye sockets and reached out with skeletal arms, welcoming me home. I let go of the branch. The fall seemed to last forever, gravity pulling me down into that tooth-lined maw while the voices of the dead sang their victory song. I should have been terrified, should have been screaming, but instead I felt only a strange sense of peace. The hunger was waiting below, vast and patient and eternal, and I was going to feed it. But as I fell, something else happened. The faces of the dead began to change, their expressions shifting from malevolent joy to confusion, then to something that might have been hope. The pit's walls stopped contracting, its rhythm faltering. "No," one of the voices whispered, and this time it sounded different, not like the collective hunger that had been tormenting me, but like an individual soul. "No, don't give up. Fight. You have to fight." "It's too late," I called back, my voice echoing off the bone walls. "I'm already dead." The crash was real," the voice interrupted. "But you survived it. You're injured, unconscious maybe, but you're alive. The pit is trying to claim you while you're vulnerable, trying to make you believe you're already gone. But you're not. You're not." Other voices joined the first, and I realized they weren't the collective hunger of the pit at all. They were the souls of the dead, trapped here against their will, fighting against the thing that held them prisoner. "It feeds on despair," another voice called out. "On hopelessness and fear. That's how it keeps us here, makes us part of its hunger. But if you don't give up, if you keep fighting." The pit shuddered around me, its walls writhing like wounded flesh. The fall was slowing, as if something was fighting against the gravity that pulled me down. "What do I do?" I shouted. "Remember," came the reply. "Remember why you came here. Remember what you're fighting for. Remember that you're alive." I closed my eyes and tried to focus, tried to push past the hallucinations and terror to find some core of truth. I was a historian. I'd come here to research, to learn, to preserve the memory of those who had died. That was my purpose, my reason for being. And I was alive. Hurt, probably dying, but still alive. The pit shrieked around me, a sound like breaking glass and tearing metal. The walls began to crack, and through the fissures I could see something impossible: daylight. Real daylight, not the false illumination of my nightmares. "Go," the voices of the dead urged me. "Go while you can. Tell the world what happened here. Don't let us be forgotten." I reached out toward the largest crack in the wall, and my fingers touched something solid. Wood? The branch I had grabbed before, still within reach. With the last of my strength, I pulled myself toward it, toward the light beyond. The pit gave one final, earth-shaking roar of frustration, and then silence. I opened my eyes to find myself lying next to my wrecked car, dawn breaking through the trees overhead. My left arm was indeed broken, and blood had dried on my forehead, but I was alive. Gloriously, impossibly alive. In the distance, I could hear the sound of approaching sirens. Someone had found me, probably a park ranger making his morning rounds. I would live to tell this story, to warn others about the devil's pit and the hungry darkness that dwells there. But as the paramedics loaded me into the ambulance, I caught a glimpse of something that chilled my blood. Through the trees, barely visible in the morning mist, I could see the pit. It was smaller now, back to its original size, looking like nothing more than an old Civil War earthwork. But I knew the truth. I knew what lurked beneath that innocent exterior, waiting for the next curious fool to stumble into its domain. The devil's pit remembers. It hungers. And it's always waiting for new souls to join its eternal feast. Sometimes, late at night, I can still hear their voices, the thousands of dead who remain trapped in that hellish crater, crying out for someone to remember them, to tell their story. I've done my best to honor that request, to make sure their sacrifice isn't forgotten. But I've never been back to Vicksburg. I can't. Because I know that if I return, if I so much as drive past that cursed place, the pit will sense me. It will remember the one that got away. And next time, I might not be so lucky. The hunger is patient. The hunger is eternal. And the hunger never forgets.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey. Here are a couple more videos for you to check out.